Bien. Alors, je vous prie d'excuser Philippe Bach, qui n'a pas pu venir, qui travaille beaucoup sur notre programme pédagogique. Donc, je le représente et je suis très honoré de faire l'introduction de cette conférence. Alors, j'ai le plaisir d'accueillir une personnalité de l'architecture, une actrice tout à fait essentielle de notre moment historique où la question du vivre ensemble de façon responsable à l'échelle locale et internationale est un des objectifs de plus en plus partagés, mais encore tellement malmenés. Nous avons donc l'honneur d'accueillir Carin Smuts, architecte sud-africaine, et j'ai le plaisir d'introduire rapidement une architecte qui fait des choses et qui a des choses à dire d'une façon importante. Alors, l'année 1984, cette même année où Carin Smuts a passé son diplôme d'architecte à l'université du Cap, est traversée d'émeutes raciales, on s'en souvient, tant dans les townships qu'en milieu rural. Il faudra attendre la présidence de Frédéric Leclerc en 1989 pour que les dernières lois de l'apartheid soient abolies et que s'engage le processus qui mènera à la nouvelle constitution de 1992. Il n'est donc pas anodin de savoir que Carin Smuts a fondé son agence CS Studio cette même année, en 1989, avec l'objectif affiché de participer aux nouvelles politiques de développement des quartiers les plus défavorisés. Depuis cette date, le CS Studio est une agence très investie dans l'architecture sociale, en milieu rural et dans les townships du Cap. En effet, Carin Smuts a une vision particulière de la responsabilité de l'architecte, du rôle de l'architecte. CS Studio a pour principe d'intégrer les futurs protagonistes au processus créatif du projet, au stade de la conception, du design et aussi de la construction. Carin Smuts se préoccupe visiblement moins de l'esthétique elle-même que du sens de cette esthétique, que cette esthétique va conférer au bâtiment. Les projets d'habitat d'équipement sont discutés avec les habitants. Les chantiers fonctionnent en ateliers de formation et, quand c'est possible, en chantier de réinsertion, au prix bien sûr d'une implication permanente de CS Studio. Carin Smuts travaille avec des budgets extrêmement faibles. Cela stimule visiblement la créativité des escouades qui sont embarquées à chaque projet. Carin Smuts utilise sa passion de l'art populaire pour faire intervenir ses acteurs, les artistes des townships ou les peintres traditionnels en milieu rural, et pas dans une vision simplement ornementale, mais pour qu'ils distribuent à la décision collective de sortir le projet malgré et avec les contingences. Un projet de Carin Smuts proche en cela des travaux du groupe Exist, bien connu à Strasbourg, produit plus d'énergie culturelle qu'il ne dépense de matière. Aujourd'hui, Carin Smuts et son agence ont à leur actif plus d'une centaine de projets qui recouvrent de nombreux aspects. Urbanisme, paysagisme, architecture, mais également assistance à la maîtrise d'ouvrage, études de faisabilité et, comme on dit, levée de fonds auprès de donateurs. Pour conclure en fait cette brève introduction, je répéterai la déclaration faite par Hermann Kaufmann lors de la remise du prix international d'architecture durable de 2008, lors d'une cérémonie qui s'est déroulée à la Villa Savoie. Elle travaille avec les problèmes de son pays, avec les matériaux de son pays et avec la population de son pays. Voilà. Carin Smuts.
Okay, can you get it started? It's very dark in here. it here? Just down, okay. It's very dark in here. Good evening, everybody. Firstly, I want to apologize that I can understand French because I have a Belgian husband, but I can't speak French. So I really want to apologize for my shortcoming. And maybe in 2 or 3 years, when you see me again, I will be able to speak a little bit. Thank you very much for inviting me to come and be part of your academic year. It's a real privilege to be here. Before I start with the formal lecture, I just want to say that yesterday I was in Cairo working with 50 students from Umeå University, which is in the north of Sweden, and we were working with the poorest people, the rubbish collectors, the people who recycle the garbage of Cairo. And it was incredibly interesting to see the contrast between Strasbourg and Cairo, where the poorest of the poor live, and then in one day I come here and I see everything works. It's not dirty, the cars don't have big dents in them, so it's a completely different world. And maybe that is what I'm going to talk about tonight, is we started off by saying, why must we listen? We have a small architectural office in Cape Town. We have about between 5 and 7 people working there. And we started 25 years ago working in communities that were incredibly poor. And what we realized very soon is that the Western European education that we got at our School of Architecture was completely inappropriate and didn't help us to be able to be architects in the world that really needed us. So I hope tonight that I can share a little bit of that story, maybe show you just a few examples of why it became the central focus of our work to listen to people. And maybe now in the world it's time that architects and engineers and professional people have to start listening to people. Because we've got a global warming and we've got a global economic meltdown, things are actually becoming much more complicated than what it was in the past. This is the city that I live in, and this is exactly what my education was about and what the young students like yourselves are still experiencing. And I think it's interesting when you look at what Juhani Palasma, the Finnish architectural philosopher, writes. He says the gradual growing hegemony of the I seems to be paralleled with the development of Western ego consciousness and the increasing separation of the self from the world. I think it's very important because today a lot of people think that computers are the only things that we should be using to teach and to produce architecture. This is 10 minutes drive from that same European city. We get into an African context where things are completely different. So this is where we discovered, how are we going to work? In our country, we're 50 million people, of which 4 million people are white, and 45 million people are either black or colored. But whilst we were studying architecture, and still today, even in the schools of architecture, they still teach people how to produce architecture for the 4 million people. So we started reading books by African writers, and this is an African writer called Ngugi from Kenya, and he writes, culture is a product of people's history, but it also reflects that history and embodies a whole set of values by which people view themselves and their place in time and space. So it became very important for us to start respecting people and to actually try and understand what is it that is in the people that we can learn from so that we can produce better spaces. This is a mountain where in June, July, 30,000 people go and dance with no shoes on for a whole month. So these are business people. You will see them, they're in the government, they might be in official positions. But during this month, and it's predominantly the Zulu tradition, people go and dance and worship on this mountain, and it's round about Easter time. This is the rural context that the majority of the people traditionally lived in, and I especially want you to look at it because if you look at the spaces in this photograph, the round buildings and the small buildings, all the social activity happen outside and in between the buildings. And it's a very interesting concept that we've discovered, that it's not the space inside, but the space in between the buildings. The other aspect that we've learned was that there's an enormous richness in the decoration. This is called the Ndebele. We have 11 different tribes and 11 different official languages in South Africa. And this is the Ndebele tribe, and I just want you to look at the way, the detail in the dress and then the detail that she's painting onto her house. Once the people get moved into the cities during apartheid, the men were moved into these hostels, and this was about 1952-53. People were moved from the rural areas, only the men, and they had to stay like this to provide labor for our cities. This is what has happened in the meantime. We've got a lot of informal settlements. In fact, half an hour from my office, there's about 1 million informal structures. So we have a city that is a beautiful European city, and all the tourists can visit it, but you drive a little bit further and you see where the real people live. And this was our real concern, is that this is a man-made disaster. It's not a tsunami, but it has the same conditions that a natural disaster would have. But the positive thing is, I want you to look at the spaces in between these shacks. There's very interesting spatial dynamics that happen where all the activities outside the shacks are where the social activities happen, where people meet themselves, where they have meetings, the children play. So this is what it looks like in elevation, and I think it's really important. This is from the highway at the airport, and do you see these concrete structures in the front? Those are the toilets, and in front of the toilets are the taps. So once you're living in an informal structure, you don't have a tap, you don't have running water, you might have electricity pole near your house, but you have your toilet far away. And one of the very sad things is the women, when they walk at night or they want to go to the toilet, a lot of them get raped because it's a very dangerous environment to be living in. The light quality at night is also not that good. This is the inside. It's very exciting when you see what people do with nothing. And I think that that's what we also have learned, that there's an enormous amount of creative energy in ordinary people. And we really look for what can we learn from people? What is that energy, the way they inhabit space? So here's a lady sitting on the inside. She's actually taken recycled cardboard from sort of canned fruit and cool drinks, and she's used it to fit out the inside of her informal structure. So what we've discovered is that for us, and I think this illustrates it, in Africa we have a pot that we use to cook in. And this pot has 3 legs. And we would like to see that sustainability is where there's a social leg, an economic leg, and an environmental. And that the pot cannot stand without the one leg. And how do we do that? When we start working with people, we assist them to do an intellectual shift. And here I've worked quite a lot with Patrick Bouchan, who also does the same work as us, and he really focuses on this, where you really look at the intellectual side and you shift it away from this sort of gloom and doom, and you shift it into a positive, creative direction. Then we do household questionnaires, one can do interviews, you can play games, and do workshops and public meetings. And we find that if we get people to participate, it leads to people being empowered, and it also leads to sustainability. So this is a slightly different kind of sustainability from the one that is driven by technology and by capitalism, which is really driving at the moment this technological sustainability. So why we do it is also to empower people. Decisions are made bottom up, and especially in poor communities. Maybe it's not the same in a democratic community, maybe it's not the same in France, but definitely in poor countries, decisions are made from the top down for people. This was at Harvard, and I think this is why I'd like to touch on it, how it could affect your lives. I was running a workshop for architects and practitioners at Harvard, and some of the students came to me and they said they've won scholarships to go and work in Kenya, in Africa, but they've never worked in a township, and nobody's ever prepared them how to go and work in this context. And these were 2 very wealthy, very privileged young girls, and they were really scared of what was ahead of them. So we did some workshops with the groups and taught them how to get people to participate. This is how we've worked in Cradock. This was 24 years ago, where we had to design a clinic. So what we did is we took the doctors, we took agronomers, we take people who deal with water. So you take a whole lot of people to go and empower and teach people about what their choices are in life. The other project we did 23 years ago was to build in a rural community about 700 kilometers from Cape Town, a community center. And when we started asking the people what would they like, they said that they would like the history of their traditional buildings to be reflected in this new contemporary structure. So I think it's really important when you ask people, you'll see that they have real opinions and they're really spatial architectural ideas that they like. So what happened in this village is that the people who were not employed were the alcoholics, because everybody else had a job. Everybody else worked on the mine, and there was a diamond mine close to this village. So we had to work with people who on Monday mornings they came and they were drunk and they used to fall off the scaffolding, but by Friday they were already starting to drink for the weekend. But they built an incredibly nice building. I mean, it's really, really beautiful, and it's still standing today, and they're very proud of it. So they also made all the bricks from the river sand on the site. We also decided that instead of getting acoustic panels and buying it from a manufacturer, we went and we trained some women who had a local sheep project. They were shearing the sheep and they were spinning and weaving, and they made all the carpets and they turned the back wall of the hall into an acoustic panel, which is done by a young artist who then drew a picture of the community. There's about 24 carpets in that wall hanging. This was just the opening. There's a library, a school, a creche, and some training facilities. This is moving back to Cape Town again, what I showed you earlier where the men were in the hostels. With time, the women moved in, and the women moved into these informal structures in between the hostels. The red brick buildings are the hostel buildings. In 1989, about 39 young kids between the age of 10 and 30 were killed in gang fights. They used to take a big knife or a bicycle. You've got lots of bicycles outside, but they would take the thing from the wheel and they would kill each other. So the parents came to us and said, what can we do for our children? And we got all the gangsters together and we started working with them. And every Thursday night for 2 years we met every single Thursday night until they had designed their building and they had designed what they wanted, and they had found a site, and we managed to raise the money. So we found a building that was a hostel, and at the bottom you can see the model. We recycled the old building. We always try and recycle buildings. So this is what came out of it. This is the newspaper that the young people then put together. And the exciting thing is that within a month, the killing stopped. Nobody got killed because they were all busy doing something that was interesting for them. And I think that it's really important that we as architects can play a very stabilizing role in community. Some of these young people are now in government. Some of them are actually leaders. Some of them are leading housing projects. So it's really encouraging and exciting. This floor was designed by the young children and also made by the children. And there's also a creche running. There was a creche running in the building. Unfortunately, last year, some new gangsters broke the building down right to the ground. So we live in a really harsh society. You know, when I walk around, I always look behind me to see if somebody's going to grab my bag or attack me. So when I come here to Stuttgart, it's a little bit strange for me to walk in a street. And I phoned Lisa and asked her if I can leave my passport in the room, because in South Africa, you will never leave anything in the room. It will just get stolen. This is in Gugulethu in Cape Town. It's a market that people they sell meat. And these people have been working like this since the 60s, just sitting on these informal tables selling their meat. So we started working with them and asked them what they wanted. And you can see here, it's really African, and they use the sheep head, they cut it in half, and they eat the brains that is on the inside. Now, I studied architecture for 6 years, and nobody told me that I would sit one day and design an African market. In fact, the first market I designed was a lovely little Italian market, because when I studied architecture, the only thing my lecturers told me was, please go and study Italian and, markets that you get in Europe. But the people told us they didn't like the markets we designed. So they asked us for a petrol station roof. They were very clear. These people can't even speak English or Afrikaans. They speak Xhosa, which is a local traditional language there. And they were very clear about what they wanted. They just wanted a roof that floated above their work so that they didn't have to work in the rain. This is what it looks like inside. What's also happened is that these people have actually managed to send their children to school. They've also managed to expand their houses. So by empowering people, and to go back to that other diagram, is that we always try and look at economic empowerment. It's incredibly important. More and more people are losing their jobs all over the world, and one has to look at inventive ways. The formal sector cannot employ everybody anymore. This is a building we built in Worcester, and why I've put it into the show is that we run lots of workshops in urban design, we build models, and in this case we wanted to convince the community not to build this at the end of the township, but to build it in the middle. But they insisted to build it in this position. And sorry about that. And can you see what's happened? The red is the building, and within 10 years, this entire community formed around it. So it's become the center of this informal settlement. And 10 or 15 years ago when we did it, I didn't realize that. But the people knew, they understand things that we just don't understand. This is an arts and culture center in Langa, and it's called Gugastebe. And it's incredibly exciting because last year, over 300,000 tourists visited this project. Now, this is where we're trying to build relationships. We're trying to build people so that they can work together with each other. And there's very exciting things. There's actually a group of German architects who are now partnering with this project, and they're doing a lot of fundraising for the different activities in this project. So there's lots of young dance groups, and there's art groups. There's very beautiful ceramics that were done by artists. And that sort of yellow thing with a maze in it is what the building is called after. It's called Gugastebe. That thing means that you can come in and you can come and share your knowledge with everybody, and everybody is welcome. So we don't even give names to the buildings. We ask the people what they want to call it. This was the day that we graduated the builders. It was all the local people from this community who built the building. So when the building was finished, we gave the electricians, the bricklayers, the carpenters, we all gave them certificates to say thank you for building the building. And just to say that this building was built for about 350,000 euros. And it's 820 square meters, and yet there's thousands of people who visit it. Then another thing we did in this building, we took 20 young people and we trained them to do mosaic work. So these young people did all the mosaic work, and since they were trained in this project, they've all been employed, at least 10 of them have been full-time employed doing fancy hotels and spas and things. So it's been very exciting. This is just to show you what happens. This is a group, this is every day. People from all over the world come, they interact with a situation which would have been completely isolated. That's just to show you from the top. There's very, very few public facilities in these communities. The white sort of box above it is a government building that is never used. People use it maybe on a Saturday for a funeral, but otherwise it just stands locked. And this was a very exciting exhibition. It was an artist called Carin Smuts, and she insisted that her gold exhibition was actually held inside the cone. So once again, wonderful exchange programs are happening between different cultures and different people. This white building is a multipurpose center in Nyanga. The two white roofs at the bottom is a typical taxi rank where thousands of commuters move in and out. It's not as sophisticated as your station as I saw today. It's far more simple. But we had to intervene and build that white roofed building that is at an angle. And it's also, again, it's really Africa. I mean, there's 10 to 15,000 old people who receive their pensions at this facility every month. You can imagine with an unemployment rate of 45%, we have an enormous amount of people who are on welfare pensions. So there's a huge economic activity that goes with it. You can see the ceramics on the building. It was the people from Guga Setebe came and they trained new people on this building. This is in the inside where we have used some nice concrete to link the old and the new building together. And these are some gangsters who actually, it's very interesting, when they come into the building, they all have knives and guns on them, but when they come into the building, they don't attack anybody. But the minute they're out on the street, they behave exactly the way they normally behave. This is the inside hall where the people receive their pensions. And then this is sort of just the street element that we created that will connect a future sports center. But I want you to look at something that's happened. We as architects like the concrete. And I've often had big problems that people don't like concrete. Normal people, not like us. So look what they've done. They've painted all the concrete yellow. So it's actually quite, there's like they interact. So this is not a bad interaction. I think it actually looks maybe better than the concrete. Here you can see the other view. They've painted all the concrete yellow, every single piece of concrete. So this is a non-architectural decision, but it's actually quite exciting. And I just put this slide in because people often ask me, how do we start a project? Now, this whole project was started by this man in the wheelchair. And he phoned me one day and he said, can you please come and build us a workshop for the disabled people? And eventually it turned into a 2,000 or 3,000 square meter building because we got the whole community. Some meetings had 700 people in the meetings. Just to show again, I mean, the trading, the activity, it's incredible. This is a school at the bottom, the red school, in a new community that was done by the government. And here we had meetings and the parents said they're very scared of their children because there's a lot of gangsters in the area and we need to build the school so that it protects their children whilst they are at the school. And then the little red building at the top is another community center that we did as a result of the school. And the same community is now asking us to do more buildings in this particular area. So that is the school from the outside. That is the hall. The school has about 1,300 children, and in the beginning it had 1,300 in the morning and 1,300 in the afternoon. So here you can just see that courtyard that we made to create. But once again, the lesson came from looking down at an aerial view of the informal settlements and the clues of how to place buildings, to leave courtyards in between. So this school has made a huge change on this community. It's really stabilized the community. This is then the center that we built quite close by. All these people don't have work. Most of these people have not had a formal education. I mean, we're basically sitting on a time bomb in South Africa with a huge amount of uneducated, unemployed people. So what we did here is we took another 10 young people and we trained them to make these murals on the outside wall. And we will keep on developing this project with these people. That is just from the back. And this is a very interesting project. There was a flood in a place called Lainsburg, and a lot of the town washed away. And I think this is very important if we look at what's just happened in Japan with the floods and what's happening with tsunamis. As architects, we have to become agents to deal with these disasters. We can't stay sitting and just doing fancy buildings. There's a huge need in the world for us to act and to do something. So this is Lainsburg, where the flood happened in 1981. And when we started working with the people, we discovered that during apartheid, the white people got care, they were interviewed, they got new houses, but anybody who was not white, nobody even talked to them, nobody even asked them what happened. So we started talking to the people, and the lady with a T-shirt with a head on front, she actually came to the Louvre to fetch Saartjie Baartman. And this was a big thing for South Africa, because the French came and took this black lady with a big bottom to the Louvre to display her as a human, sort of an interesting element. And then eventually, through a lot of work, we managed to get the remains back, and she's buried where she was born in the village. And that lady is very good with healing and bringing healing to people. So she came and she listened to everybody's story. So sometimes it's not us. Sometimes we're not the right people. We bring other people on board. And then she listened to everybody's story. And the man standing next to her on her left, he watched 8 family members drown in front of him. And it was the first time somebody had asked him any questions. And the other man with the blue hat, he saved 5 white people's lives, and the white people, even today, will walk on the other side of the road. They won't greet him, they won't talk to him. So although we've had liberation, we haven't actually had any liberation. So she wrote this beautiful poem, taking all their stories, and the one sentence that came out in everybody's story was, "The water was like a red raging bull." This was what we found on the site, 2 buildings that we could recycle. And here you can see the model. So we also get quite involved with building models and working with metal workers. The community wanted the metal workers to get involved. And we started recycling the building and using this metaphor of the red raging bull. And you can see here, they also wanted a windmill. They wanted a train, because traditionally the village was started as a train station. So there's lots of stories, and it doesn't get told in one meeting or in one night. We meet for 2 years. We listen and we listen and we listen, and we collage these different layers of stories together, so that at the end of the day you come up with sort of a production of elements. And we also, you can see the recycled metal. We recycled the old roofs. You can see how the old texture of the corrugation becomes like a velvet texture, which is really nice. And all the bricks that we didn't use, we also recycled that. What we also did in this project is we trained 4 young people, and we got an internationally well-known artist who does recycling called Willie Bester, and he trained these 4 guys. There's only 2 on the picture. But they then went to the farms and they picked up all the implements that they were throwing away, the spades and the wheels, and they made all these beautiful handrails for the project. And you can see what it looks like from the road. It sits in the middle of this community. What's also happened is that it's the area where we have the highest accidents in South Africa, road accidents. Every year there's hundreds of people. In December, it's like, close 500-600 people get killed on this road. And what this community has done is they've set up a center that once an accident happens, they provide support for the accident. Here you can see the ambulances at the back there. So from the back of this building, they run a support, because we have these small taxis, and once they've had an accident, and they normally have 2 or 3 of them at the same time, then you're sitting with 40, 50 people who need to be looked after. Maybe only 2 or 3 have bad injuries. So it's a very interesting thing that a community that was very badly damaged can now give something back to another group of people they don't even know. This was at a prison. The green building is a maximum security prison where there's 3,000 prisoners, and we were asked to build a village for 10,000 of the people who work in the prison. And it was also very interesting that they said they just didn't want it to look like an institution. They wanted to be able to have a difference between the institution they work in and where they live. So here we can see there's a lot of public facilities. There's a multi-purpose hall in the front, the Golden Hall, because there's about 14 different or 15 different religious groupings. Then they have a gym, they have restaurants. So this is isolated. It's about 20 minutes from another town, which is not a very big town, and it's about 1.5 hours from the closest bigger town. So it has to be totally self-sufficient and self-reliant. So another lesson that we learned from listening to people was the small spaces that are communal spaces become very important in terms of security. So people can sit, and we've organized it once again that these small spaces overlook the public areas. So the lessons that we're learning from the context that we're working in, we've used to structure the spaces. So people can sit outside at the same time as observing and monitoring the people and the children playing outside and their cars. The decoration that we showed you earlier on, we also try and pull that into all the buildings. This was a government project, so it was very hard to get the government does not like you getting people to participate. They definitely don't want to bring community people onto the site or other people to build. They just want the contractor to build. So it was very sad that we had to stick to just the contractor. But here is the kids that live in between the spaces. It's a completely vibrant community. And just to show you what is very interesting, this is 11 square meters. The room is incredibly small. And this woman stays in here with 4 people. She's got the 2 children and a care worker. She's got the 3 children and a care worker and herself. So they've occupied 11 square meters in a very similar way to how they would have occupied the shack that they live in. This is in France, in Follenville-Dendermonde, where we worked for the Global Award project. And it was very interesting because there were 2 villages that had one municipality, and these villages had never talked to each other or met each other, although they had one shared municipality. And we had some very exciting workshops, and they identified problems that they've really struggled with over many years, and it was a very exciting process. We also worked with the children. The children are all in the age of 11. So they drew incredible solutions of how they want to unify these 2 communities. We then landed up building models, and this is just also to show the process of it's a lot of model building. There's a lot of drawings before you come to final decisions. And everybody voted for this last one, cohesion. But the mayor was so powerful that he said he doesn't like this 3-building example. He just wants 1 building. So that's also, we often have a problem with powerful politicians or powerful leaders. They can actually take a whole group of people and override their decisions. So this was eventually what the building was going to look like, still with a square outside and a central space that the parents could get together. There is the model. It's a small shop. And the children were busy working on designing the murals on the inside. But what happened with this project is that it was, when Sarkozy came into power, the Ministry of Culture actually stopped this entire Global Award project and investing in it. So that was as far as this project went. Then this is a project close to Cape Town where there's incredibly beautiful whales. And there's a lot of tourists that come from all over the world to see the whales because they have their babies in this area in the sea. And we are working with a poor community which lives and provides labor for a very wealthy seaside resort called Hermanus. And this community has asked us, and we've worked with them for 2 years, how can they get the tourists to stop in their village and not just drive past them. So this is to show some of the workshops we do. We really get people to draw. We don't draw at all until maybe a year later. We really, in the beginning, we just listen and we let people do their drawings. Here you can see what's also happening in this community. There's a lot of gangsters. We have a lot of drug problems and prostitution, and abalone, perlemoen, gets exported to China. And these 2 guys are quite high up in that whole hierarchy. And it was very interesting that when they had to draw a drawing, they forgot about being the leaders of the gang. So they became like everybody else, and it was a very interesting process. We also worked with the children in this community. And once again, they drew beautiful drawings, but when we had to ask them to give the name of their group, they gave quite violent gang names. So this reality of their lives at home came out in this small exercise. This is just to show like a typical meeting where everybody comes, and then on this night we elect a committee who will then work with us to see the building through to the end. So what they wanted was a big whale that would float in the sky and that would make the cars stop. And then you could come and sit in this whale and see out onto the sea what is happening. And then with some commercial activity at the bottom. This is just to show the models we built. And people will come and break the model or turn it the other way around. So we really don't build fancy models. We want people to break the models and get involved with them. This is the last slide, and I just want to sum up that it's this energy that is in this girl that we are looking for. We're looking for the energy in people. There's a lot of talk about technology, wind generation, solar panels. In the context where we work, there isn't that. There is no money for that. So what we're really trying to look at is what is the energy that is in this girl. Thank you. I was given instructions that you can ask questions, but you have to raise your hand and you have to get the microphone. But I just would like to show you a small exercise before we ask questions. When we start working with people, and it's a very nice exercise, we will go and say, you see this piece of paper? Now you must climb through it with your whole body. I think somebody must translate that into French, please. Come, Lisa. We give them this piece of paper, A4 in half, and we tell them they must climb through this piece of paper. Climb. Yes, with their whole body. Can somebody translate it into French for us? We architects, people. Okay, you have to climb through here with your whole body. You must put your body through this piece of paper. I'm not going to show you now because there's 10 solutions. But when people have done the exercise, then you say to them, this looks impossible, but it's possible. So that's what I was talking about, that intellectual shift that you can make with people. You give them an exercise. We do lots of exercises. We've got hundreds of tricks, I can tell you. I've got a friend who works in Thailand, and she gets young girls to seduce young boys to come to the meeting. So there's all these tricks that you can play. But this is the best one I've ever seen, and it's a lot of fun. So please, try when you go home to climb with your whole body through this piece of paper. It's very rewarding. Okay. Are there any questions? Here's a lady in the front. Now, can you just wait for the mic because they're trying to record. There's another lovely lady over there. She's going to come towards you.
It's just a small question. How we will know the answer of the exercise?
Oh, I think you'll do it. You know, in one of our exercises when we did this, somebody made a beautiful lantern. So she didn't climb through it, but she made something creative. I'll show you afterwards, okay? And you know, sometimes the people I work with, they are this size. You saw the people in the market. They're not small. And they don't speak the language. I mean, we've got a problem with French and English. They speak Xhosa and Zulu and Sotho and Tswana. So I don't understand them. They don't understand me either. That's why this is good. There.
Good evening, I'm from Brazil, and I would like to ask how can a lot of your good propositions for no money, no technology, no lack of resources, how can you do a very good work there where you live, and I was wondering how would be good strategies to not only not focus, but to extend this work you do. And then, because I'm from Brazil, we have the same problems. So, yeah, thank you.
Thanks for the question. I must actually tell you that you probably know the Mst Movement in Brazil. Do you know them? The Mst, yes. I was invited in 2000 to do workshops with them. And the day we arrived, the government locked 19 of their leaders up, which meant the whole 2 weeks that we were in Brazil, we could do no work. But what is very important is that in each of your contexts, the answers are there. It's not about me or about somebody else. When we were working yesterday in Cairo with the people recycling the rubbish, I mean, I've never seen poverty like that in my whole life. And I kept on saying to the students, don't ask me, go and ask those poor people. Ask them what the solution is, because they have to find it and they have to make it. So I think that, the Mst movement was a very good example of people going into a rural context, claiming land, and then starting with agriculture. That's not architecture. But the Mst movement, their biggest need was for an architect who can come and work with them and build public facilities and build schools and things. So I think that's where there's a gap for an architect to actually find out where these gaps are. And you'll see the people have creative solutions. They've worked themselves from living in a black plastic shack to having a farm and exporting rice. So I think it's very difficult. I have found that not one place that I've worked is the same as the next one, even if it is 10 kilometers from each other. There's no solution. It must come from the people there. There's somebody in front of the Brazilian.
Hi, I'm also from Brazil. I
can't see that far. I must put my glasses on. Okay.
The majority of your projects are financed by the government or by... I doubt that.
No. And you know what? During apartheid, the government didn't want to give us 1 cent. In fact, I nearly got locked up. Most of my friends got locked up and was put in prison. But we raised money by doing a business plan. So we would first get the process, get the community strong, so that they made a committee, and then we would do a plan, a very simple plan, and do a costing. And then we would send that to international funders. And up to 1996, all the projects we did was only funded with outside money. It was money that we raised through hundreds of letters, hundreds of fundraising events. And the sad thing is, 16 years after Mandela has been released and we've got a democracy, it's worse. It's much worse. We're getting no help from the government. The ANC government is not supporting any development in these poor areas. So we again doing the same thing we did under apartheid. We have to look at, and there's a huge trend in the world for big companies to have social development. So it's really worth it, finding out who are the big guys, who are the oil, the diamonds, the gold, and you go and play on their conscience. You get money out of them.
Because in Brazil, we can't count a lot on the government, so we need to go look for other solutions and to come with the people, put the people together and think about how we're going to raise money for the building. This is also a part that we don't learn at school, and it's very great to hear from you, because we as an architect, I'm thinking, who's going to finance my building when I can, with the people together, find a solution for that. So it's great. Thank you.
I think it's really important for young architects today. The world you're not going to find a job in an office. It's becoming less and less. I went to a lecture the other night in Japan by Tadao Ando. And you know what he did in the lecture? He told everybody to give money. He didn't talk about architecture. There were 5,500 people in the auditorium. You know what he said? Each one of you are going to give me 100 euros tonight before you leave that door. This is the big guru, architect, telling us we're going to give money. And then he started telling us why we're going to give money, because he's going to go and work in the tsunami area with a lot of young architects, and the whole architectural scene in Japan is changing like this. That tsunami has changed those people. They're not interested in fancy buildings anymore. They all realize they've got to build that country again. There's the lady there.
Hi, I was just wondering how difficult it is to get people involved in the community in the first place. When you first come out and you have this idea for a project, how difficult is it to get people to come to that first community meeting or to follow up later on? If you have those community meetings over a course of 2 years, how difficult is it to get people to continually come and give you feedback and ideas?
I think it's very important that it mustn't be your idea. It must be their idea. It must be their project, and they must want to come back. The minute it's something that is from the outside in, it never works. It's always much more difficult. So it's really, really... But there's two parts to your question that I want to answer. The one thing is it's got to come from the people. They must ask for it, and they must sustain it. As an outsider, you can't really. It's very delicate. And then there's another thing, is that it's very difficult to work in certain contexts. Like now, trying to work in Cairo, one of the student groups wanted to interview the youth about their future. And yesterday they were not allowed to talk to the youth, because in that culture there's protocol, and you've got to set up first through the leader, and then through the teacher, and then through the parents. You're not allowed to take photographs of these children. And then we had to sit with the students and work out, how do you, when you've got a block, how do you work through that thing that wants to prevent you from making it a success? So I think you land up being a sociologist, economist. You've got to have many, many skills to make this thing work. And you sometimes have to rely on other people. And definitely with language. I mean, most of the places I go to, I have to have a translator. And then you must make sure it's somebody who's respected by the community. You can't go with a translator who's the biggest gangster in the community. It's going to get you nowhere. You've got to try and find somebody who's respected or who's an honest person. And there's not many of those in the world.
So you said that you studied for 6 years Italian markets and Western culture. How did you change your mind and pick up something so different like social architecture in Africa?
We designed a small, in 1986 we designed a small school for 400 little children in a rural town called Craddock. And when there was a big opening and there were thousands of people, and I arrived at this beautiful little building I designed, and there were 15 skins of sheep that had just been slaughtered, lying on the lovely grass we had planted for the children to play on, and there were about 20 women boiling this meat and drying the meat, and this little white kitchen I designed was just covered in blood from the floor to the ceiling. When then I realized I have no clue what's going on. So I was probably 2 years out of university when I realized that I was definitely not going to cope with the reality of my context. And I think I saw that yesterday again. I mean, I've worked for 25 years with poor people, but what I saw yesterday, I mean, I just don't even know how one starts and how you bring hope into a situation that just looks so completely lost. Yeah. Somebody's going to have to translate for me because it's a little bit fast.
Vous avez dit tout à l'heure, quand on était avant la conférence, que vous avez été enseignante dans une conversation, mais vous avez arrêté. Par contre, si vous deviez reprendre l'enseignement, et peut-être en Europe, si vous étiez invité, quel serait sans doute, avec votre expérience aussi de l'Europe, ce que vous avez dit aussi, peut-être aussi de nos problèmes thermiques, de statut de l'architecture, qu'est-ce que vous aimeriez enseigner?
Do you need a translation?
Yes, I think I understood, but rather just translate the essence for me.
Yes, if you would teach again, what would you teach?
Oh, no, but I understood what I
What
actually...
would you? How would you focus on
No. I understand.
energical and in Europe,
Okay.
in European countries?
Okay. Every year I teach at Gothenburg University in Sweden. And what we do is that they have many immigrant communities. And we have managed to set up a project in Hemakulen, which is a huge immigrant community. And we are actually teaching the architectural students and the education students. We work with teachers and architects. So we combine them and we work with the people who live in these blocks, these huge blocks. And for me it's about cultural diversity. And I think that's in any European city. I mean, the world has changed. People are migrating. There's nowhere do you get these very sort of clearly culturally arranged cities. And I think cultural diversity in Europe it's an important aspect. And people can what we work on is to get people to respect each other's culture, because then you start benefiting from it. So when we work in this area, we have tried to work with the women and the men and trying to find out what they would do to improve that condition. We don't tell them, we ask them what they would do. And then we slowly see if we can't organize it, that it starts happening. So sometimes it's small, but I think that's also why we're trying to push for practical work rather than classroom teaching. Because you need a bit of a mix of real... these students that have worked for a month in Cairo, I think that their whole life is going to be hugely affected. I mean, they come from Emu that is even more cut off than any place that's right close to the end of the earth. And I think they've benefited enormously from seeing the way you can have your education, but you can make it richer with other techniques. There's another person.
Yes, hello. George Heinz. I'm a professor in this School of Architecture in Strasbourg. I first want to say that I'm really impressed by your personal investment, and I have a very strong respect on all the efforts, all the time you give, and your courage, I must say, because this situation looks sometimes really dangerous. So above this, you showed a few projects which always, I'm interested in it mainly on the question of the program. Because your clients are the people living there. It's not a government, it's not a municipality. And you manage all that in this phased dimension, and it's really complexity, human complexity. But at the end, there's a project. There are forms, colors, knowledge to build, to do. I mean, there's all this educational, etc. dimension, which is very respectable. But when I look to your projects, they still look like the produce of some architects which are concerned with forms, with materials, with colors. So when you say the people do the project, of course they do the project, but that means that these people, you would do another project 10 years later or 10 years before, the people are different. So it would be always another project.
Yeah.
But still, well, you show there's a continuity. I mean, inside this difficulty and this phased identities of everybody, and this, because it's one of the points, how to do something which is to do with architecture and not only construction, that anybody could do, I would say, and still keep, I wouldn't say a style, but at least an attitude. And what I feel in your work is a very strong attitude which goes through the question of technology, through the question of forms, etc., inspired by the people, but still you are the architects. So how do you manage this dimension? I think it's quite magic to see that.
If I must be honest, I think we brainwash people, because what we do is we give them a lecture on architecture, like I do here. I will have a community meeting. I will show them Frank Gehry's building in Bilbao. You know, I will show them things that will stimulate them, because otherwise where do we start talking to them? So I will show them work of all over the world. I'll show them some stuff in Bangladesh, maybe some stuff, but things that would make them realize they've got to use their brain. And then they will even go home and go and find magazines and tear pictures or bring things, and they will come and say, we like this or we don't like this, or, you know, it's an incredibly interesting thing. But I think that the thing that I just feel about architecture, and I think that's what is the most difficult I have found with students, is that it's very easy to grasp this from a theoretical point of view, but to turn it into a spatial condition and an architectural solution is really difficult. And I think that is what you are touching on. And I don't know, I just hope that there's some small lessons that we are learning from being informed. I don't think I'm answering your question correctly, but we are trying to be informed by our condition, but we are still manipulating the situation.
Yeah, but on the other hand, I like your answer. It gives hope, first on education, which means that it's only, not only, but it's mainly a produce of a relationship based on I give you my knowledge, part of it at least, do what you want with it, but think to it. That gives the feedback. And it works, of course, with generosity. And I think that's probably the level of your work. Thank you.
Thank you. But, you know, I think that I've been very privileged to go to Japan 2 weeks ago and to listen to somebody.
By the way, I was there.
Yes.
Sorry, by the way, I was there with you 2 weeks ago.
That's it.
And I was really shocked, and I don't...
No, it was so powerful.
I don't feel like you about that, I won't, though. Yeah. Sorry.
No, it was incredible what the people, the power that destruction did to the people in Japan it's incredible. And I think it can happen to any of us. So, but maybe just to tell a short story about what we're doing with the students in Paris. We are teaching a 3-day, and it comes back to your question. We're teaching a 3X studio. And what we've done is we've asked the students to choose a man-made disaster or a natural disaster and come up with solutions, but real solutions. And it was fascinating because the one group chose an island that will have a volcano. And they wanted to do something to intervene before the volcano happens. So this is something I never thought about, is we've got science, we've got very sophisticated science, and what can we as architects do to assist and mediate before the disaster? I think that's a really interesting thing that came up from the students. Whereas that's why I find this European condition very interesting, because a lot of the students really care. And they are aware of what's happening, but they're not given an opportunity to find a solution. And it's very interesting, the solutions they came up with. Yeah.
Well, earlier you talked about the lack of participation with government institution in your project. And I am very curious because I I wanted to know if in your career you made some very strong opposition with a government institution, with one of your projects or other things you did.
Yeah. We are busy working on a very, very nice clinic, a very big clinic in a very poor community. And the government won't let us talk to the community. It's incredibly difficult. So all I'm going to have to do is go behind their back and talk to the community. I'm going to have to make a trick, and that's what I was saying earlier on. Sometimes you get a wall that comes up in front of you. Then you have to think, how am I going to solve this problem? So we often have this problem with at school. I mean, I went on Sunday afternoons to meet with the community when the government didn't know I was meeting with them. And they just said, don't talk to the community, because then you make them excited and you give them hope and they want big things. So the government is very anti-talking to the community. Even although this government were the people we were working with. It's the same people. They were the people in the communities. They were the people that was working with me are now in power, and they won't let us work with the communities. So the democracy we all fought for, there is no democracy. I mean, we're going back to the dark ages in South Africa.
I'm a little bit curious about this project. What would it be?
Okay. This is incredibly interesting. It's a man called Sibusiso, and he built this aeroplane. He lives in the middle of nowhere. It's in the mountains, in a small village. And I've actually got other slides where he's built more aeroplanes and cars around this aeroplane. This is his house. So he just decided he wanted to fly and built himself an aeroplane. And that's part of this creativeness that is in people. You know, I mean, I can sit and talk to him for hours, and he's got a portion of a car, and you open the door and you can get into the house, and it's a big space inside. It's a very nice piece of architecture. So I always say to people, that's the aeroplane I'm going to fly home with. It does look like a whale. But you see now, this is where we will make a bit of, when we detail the whale, we'll try and see what are the lessons here, what are the other lessons, and try and build up a technology for the whale. Except the whale is where the wind blows 120 kilometers, so we've got to be a little bit more careful. I think the idea of technology is very important for students. I mean, we saw it in the last 3 days where the students just said they feel completely inadequately prepared from a technological side. I mean, they were intellectually, and they were third-year students, and they felt intellectually they could cope with the complexities, and they knew when they were wrong and when they had to stand back. But they said from a technological point of view, they just felt totally ill-equipped to answer the challenges. And then I want to just give a last thing. Hand drawings, people. Those are the best things in the world, is to do a hand drawing. Computers, you cannot find a computer in the middle of nowhere. You know, when there's been a tsunami, there's no computers, there's no electricity. So just learn to draw. If you look at Shigeru Ban, the Japanese architect, he makes the most beautiful buildings. What is he doing? He's drawing by hand. You look, everybody's coming back to the making of architecture. You are the luckiest people in the world. You're in the most incredibly exciting time for architects. You are really lucky. But I really recommend you throw your computer out the window, at least for a few days. Okay, thank you.